Thanks, Adam, and welcome everyone. My name's Alastair Leith, as lead author of this report, and just want to start with some acknowledgements. I was born on Wurundjeri land, the home of the Kulin Nations, now living and working on Wadawurrung land in central Victoria. This report, commissioned by Clean State, made possible by Clean Energy Council. Really want to thank Nikki Potter and Dr. Anita Talberg there for making research available to us before it was published. Research was conducted by ISF, Dr. Jay Rudovitz and Dr. Chris Briggs. Want to thank them for making it available and also interpreting the data for us. Also, it was a team effort. I'd like to thank Rob Phillips, Len Bunn, Angus King and Mike Allen for their contributions as well. Okay. Jobs modelling is very popular at the moment since COVID-19 struck for obvious reasons, but we've been looking at it for, well, pretty much since then started, but certainly in the last 4 or 5 years. And this was some work we did after talking to the unions and exploring their sensitivities around employment and concerns for what sort of jobs would be created if a transition occurred. Are they good jobs? Where are they located? What are they doing? That type of thing. So we started in about 2017 looking at that in more detail. This is something we showed Clean State. They said, could you update it? And we went down that path. Two general approaches to jobs modelling that happens. Economists tend to use by budget and use tables of data that go back decades in terms of how many people are employed in what areas associated with a certain budget size. The other method is to do for energy projects in terms of capacity. Engineers tend to use that. SEN's made up more so of engineers than economists, and also we can do quite detailed modelling around the energy, whereas the economic modelling, becomes a bit more fraught, particularly for us. So we went with capacity modelling. Also, the costs change. There's various pros and cons to each type of modelling, and costs in these technologies are moving a bit more rapidly than in other areas. So sticking to capacity can be beneficial in that way too. This is just some summary data that the Clean Energy Council used to put in their has put in their past annual reports. It's 2000, 2018, 2019 by state, and jobs versus total budget, total cost of CapEx. So you can see there's a general trend. This is same projects in 2018, 2019, same division by state, but jobs per megawatt. You can see there's a general trend line there for both years. There's some outliers, but you can say rule of thumb, there's some association. Of course, if you talk to academics in this field, they say, no, you can't use that data because, it's all, every company reports the job numbers in different ways and they omit different things. And it's really just to show that that's the general trend at a very gross level. You can see WA down here at the bottom, almost nothing in 2018 and getting going in 2019. Not going to talk much about the climate science, but it's very clear to us that we need urgent action. The energy sector, the stationary energy sector, is a key place for that action. Ursula would have already been talking about that. The 1.5 degrees report from IPCC was interpreted by a lot of people to mean a lot of different things, but for us it means we need rapid decarbonisation, particularly in the electricity sector, because we can leverage that into transport, buildings and industry. And we've even seen papers now that suggesting we could be at 1.5 by 2025. So getting there without overshoot, staying below 1.5 without overshoot or drawdown by 2030 is extremely challenging, and we think needs to be prioritised by all governments at all levels, in particular state government of Western Australia. Our jobs model is made up of three parts, if you like. There's an energy model, which says how much and when. There's a thing called decline factors, which relate to just the falling costs or the rise, but generally the falling costs of CapEx associated with the technologies that we're deploying in the model. And the employment model itself, which uses employment factors that came, in this case, from the Clean Energy Council and also from academic research, plus a general model which brings all that together. The energy model is made up of historical data up to 2019. We used our own modelling tools to produce an energy model that accounts for every hour, 8,760 hours in the year, and make sure that energy can be dispatched using the technologies we deploy based on historical weather data. This is what our energy model looks like over time. You can see green at the bottom is wind, indicated by orange rooftop solar, utility solar. We think these are all realistic. They move from historical conditions. It's not a step change jump. It's actually a pretty smooth transition given the amount of wind and solar that went in 2020 or is going to be commissioned by the end of the year. There is a step change in terms of coal. We looked at retiring coal straight away, quite a lot of it. There is overcapacity on the Swiss, and gas can cover that. We looked at increasing the amount of open cycle gas turbine gas in terms of backup and system reliability and security. And we look at decommissioning the combined cycle gas later on in the decade. This is exactly the same data, looking at it in terms of delta. It's the change each year. 2020 is what is going in. You can see 2022 is pretty similar. It's actually a bit less, 388 megawatts as opposed to the 400 odd that's going in. 2021 is half because wind turbines and wind farms, as long as they're connected to the grid, can start generating before the project is actually complete. So given a 1.5 to 1.8, years of build time, it's realistic that you can actually have some of the wind farms producing electricity in the first year, a portion of them. Utility solar would need to kick off. We've got Meriden going in, which is 100 megawatts this year, but we started with about 150, 160 in the first year, and it increases a little bit each year. You can also see at the top there, adding the open cycle gas turbines. That just gives us the ability to power the grid without any renewables, and I'll explain why later. Again, this is just the wind farms that have gone in. There's Colgar in the red, and Yandon at the top, Warradaji below Colgar, and Badgingarra went in last year. This is why we need gas on the way to 100% renewables. We can retire coal, but there are going to be periods where we need gas because economically viable amounts of storage are not going to cut it, particularly across the transition from the sort of 30% to 80% area. The top graph is about 4 weeks in summer. The bottom graph is about 4 weeks in winter. You can see in summer there's very little of the red, which is the burning fossil gas. You can see the pink is batteries, both domestic and utility. The light green is pumped hydro. We had 800 megawatts of pumped hydro in this model. And the lower graph shows a lot of red. That's where you get these sustained periods of becalmed weather, overcast weather, not much wind, not much solar, and that's where we need the gas. Not to say that we're going to burn more gas than we burn currently. We burn a lot less. We burn 10% of the mix as opposed to 43 today, but it needs to be there until there's enough renewables and storage to cover any eventuality. The crosshatched area, for those that are interested, is the curtailment of energy, renewable energy on the grid. So you can see in summer, every day, there's a lot of solar being curtailed, and on some days, wind as well. Just to reinforce that point, currently burning 43% gas. If we closed coal straight away, say in 2021, that would probably increase a little bit to maybe 49% gas. Then as we start rolling out wind and solar, in particular wind, that starts to penetrate, less and less gas being required. Obviously, at 90% renewables, you're only emitting 10%, 95, 5% gas, and then eventually it's all gone. We think the 10% is the hardest part to project forward about, so we're not really that concerned with working out exactly what that mix is going to look like, and we think there's a lot of factors that are going to influence that. Decline factors, we've used the AEMO decline factors. They just are they're put together by CSIRO. They're the CapEx cost of technology projected forward. So these are pretty arbitrary decline factors. We're using them because that's what people are using at the moment in industry. Some academics would point out that there's some very arbitrary assumptions in these, that like CST just starts falling in cost in 2034, 2033. Batteries stop declining in cost around 2030. Yeah, it's pretty arbitrary, but it's what we've got. So it gives us some idea we use them to associate the loss of jobs in a certain technology. The decline in jobs per megawatt is associated directly with the CapEx. And that all comes together in a set of spreadsheets, and we've adopted various academic sources for how all these functions work together. This is the result. We see to 2030, you can see wind jobs really pick up in 2020, then take another boost in 2022, and the light green is pumped hydro, very labour intensive, a lot of concrete being poured, etc., a lot of earth moving, very suited to people who might have worked in coal mining down in Collie. Very similar kinds of work. There is potential for mine site remediation and conversion into pumped hydro as well. Although there's many other sites on the Darling Scarp that would be applicable. We started with very low numbers of prosumer batteries, and then as they become more economically interesting to consumers, there's a strong growth in that. Utility batteries, we've started at 50 megawatts a year, I think it was, and that grows also. Transmission jobs, we have been very conservative with. We've just modelled for high voltage AC line upgrades. We're not looking at maintenance jobs. We're not looking at manufacturing jobs associated with that. We're not looking at network jobs. Changing the networks from one-way distribution to two-way distribution, and all the substation work that needs to go on around that. This is the same data but filtered a different way. It's filtered by category. Can see that there's a modest amount of domestic manufacturing. That's pretty much dependent on whether there's a strong pipeline of work as to whether we can get strong manufacturing goals met for local content. That's happened in Victoria. There's a wind farm in Victoria that's assembling turbines. Vestas are assembling their turbines in an old disused car factory. So they're assembling them from major components. They're not doing all the manufacturing in Victoria, but I think it's 68% local content for construction and installation and 90% local content for operations and maintenance. Decommissioning, that is decommissioning of gas and coal largely at this stage in this coming decade. A lot of this employment is regional. We can look at wind being about 67% and solar farms being about 69% of employment in the regions. Operations and maintenance, 73%, and for wind, and 54% for solar. Longer term, when we keep building solar and wind farms, there comes a point where there's a crossover where the operations and maintenance jobs actually, because they are ongoing jobs for the lifetime of the project, so that might be 25 to 40 years, they accumulate. And at a certain point, there's actually more people working in maintaining the system than there are in building the system. So that happens in our model around 2033. It's a bit like painting of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. You actually start looking up around 2045 around decommissioning wind farms or repowering them and putting in new farms. And so by the time one set of wind and solar farms are being retired, you're building the replacements. And so it becomes a continual sustainable industry. And that's about all we've got time for. I'd love to talk more, but I'm sure you'd love to listen to the panelists a lot more than me. Thanks very much.